Jean-Baptiste Poquelin, better known by his stage name of Moliere, was a 17th century French comic playwright and actor, living in a time when Europe lauded universality over individuality. In this neoclassical age, roughly 1660 to 1780, Western literature took both its forms and values from the writings of ancient Greece and Rome, imitating playwrights like Terence and Plautus. Partly in reaction to over a century of religious wars driven by individual conscience, society's classical literary heritage had been reframed using conformity rules, applicable even to comedies. All neoclassical plays had to tick the following boxes: verisimilitude or realism, utilite et dulce or usefulness and delight, an expected degree of decorum, and the use of type characters. The verisimilitude rule required stories to be connected to real life, and, for universality, to take place in a single setting with a single plot and all within a 24-hour time frame. Utilite et dulci, Latin for usefulness and delight, often called the primary rule, demanded that literature should always teach practical lessons using entertainment that also brought pleasure. Decorum specified that comedies should ridicule idiocy using contemporary settings, language, and characters, while tragedies using old stories and noble characters should punish immorality. Character types, not highly individualistic figures of the kind Shakespeare crafted, were the ordained standard to make everyone on stage as familiar, thus as widely applicable, as possible. Such types had been a staple of classical drama, and Molière skillfully rebooted the most iconic: the sneaky servant, the hypochondriac, the jealous older husband, the miser, the bragging soldier. These restrictions on creativity betray a social engineering theory that instead of lecturing fools, hypocrites and fanatics, publicly ridiculing them in art would drive them back into conformity. Thus, this age of reason, as it was sometimes called, used entertainment to impose values based on empirical evidence, reasoning and common sense, promoting group above personal norms. If such conformity pressure sounds almost medieval, just consider that today, Hollywood movies and acceptability rules on internet platforms reflect policies which work the same way. Molière's genius was to create within his era's constraints, stretch the boundaries, and despite so many mandatory formulas, craft fascinating, hilarious plays still performed and imitated today. In each of his comedies, a deviant, fraud or eccentric is presented satirically, in order to expose and ridicule their motives and behavior, then to bring them back into line with social normalcy. Molière's early career one-act play, The High-Browed Ladies, shows us two young women who have read just too many romances and now expect all men to court them like chivalric knights. In this plot concept, we can again see echoes of the highly influential Don Quixote, who had, of course, gone mad after reading those same romances and become just such an idealized hero. But our high-browed ladies are brought back into line with social norms when would-be boyfriends trick them into thinking that their valets are romantic wooers, teaching them a lesson. In The Misanthrope, its central figure Alceste becomes disgusted by the hypocrisy and glib triviality of his own social circle and then demands that people should always be brutally honest. While the play shows that this is not a realistic or helpful standard to impose on society, for it will surely lead to conflict and isolation, the playwright also makes us feel sympathy for Alceste. Molière's climaxes reveal a certain cynicism about the likelihood of curing eccentrics or social deviants, because often he uses a miracle or royal intervention to finally trigger a happy ending, though his hero or anti-hero is always taught a lesson. In a Molière comedy, the real target is the audience, who are meant to recognize their own flaws, then go home and work on them. In The Imaginary Invalid, Molière's titular character is a hypochondriac, another deviant who is ruining his family's life and his daughter's romantic life through an obsession with his health. forcing his daughter to marry an extremely ill-suited and boring doctor, just to save money on house calls, then finally becoming a bogus doctor himself. This invalid wreaks domestic havoc. But the play is nonetheless hysterically funny, and is still enjoyed in multiple languages today. And of all of Moliere's works, it holds, for its brilliant author, the most touching significance. For Moliere, being a quintessential theatre person like Shakespeare, acted in his own plays, and was still devotedly performing in them at the very end of his life, despite being critically ill. He used his terminal illness, a lung condition, to convincingly play the main character of the imaginary invalid one last time, before dying just a few hours after the curtain came down. This master of comedy himself would no doubt have loved the theatrical irony. A dying man playing the role of a healthy man who plays the role of a sick man in order to manipulate others. Whether in his witty one-liners and quips, long, intricate comedy of errors dialogues, amusing bits of stage business, or each play's clever structure, Moliere shines at the apex of his craft. It's virtually impossible today to name a successful rom-com movie, TV comedy series, stand-up comedian, or political satirist who doesn't owe some debt to Jean-Baptiste Poquelin or the Masterful Moliere.
If you love plays and enjoyed our survey of literature's father of onstage comedy, you might be equally interested in The Dark Side, theatre's Kings of Tragedy, back in episode 5.